So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. When you're solving this, you don't want to think of this as a negative b. You want to think of it as the opposite of b. So the first thing is you have to have everything off to one side, which this one's ready. So then a is in front of your squared term, b is in front of the variable with just 1 as an exponent, and c is the constant. So to do this, we do x equals the opposite of b. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c, and all of that is over 2a. So that equals 2 plus or minus the square root. Okay, negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. After you do that, everything else after the squared, that all gets multiplied together. So negative times a negative is a positive, and 4 times 3 is 12. And that's going to be over 2. So you get 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. The square root of 16 is 4, so 2 plus or minus 4 over 2. Okay, what you want to do is look at all three of these numbers and see if you can divide them by the same number, and we can divide them all by 2, so let's go ahead and do that. Dividing by 2 is like taking half, so half of 2 is 1, plus or minus half of 4 is 2, and then 2 divided by 2 is 1, but if you have 1 on the bottom of a fraction, you just leave it alone. So you split this apart. We've got 1 plus 2, that equals 3, and 1 minus 2, that equals negative 1. So 3 and negative 1 are your answers to that problem. Okay, number 2. I have to move the 4y over by making it a negative 4y because, like I said before, everything has to be off to one side. So I get 0 equals 4y squared minus 4y minus 3. Just put everything in order. So you've got your A, your B, and your C. So x equals the opposite of b. The opposite of negative 4 is positive 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So that equals 4 plus or minus the square root. Okay, negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. Everything after that gets multiplied together. I do the signs first and then the numbers. So a negative times a negative is a positive. And 4 times 4 is 16, times 3 is 48 over 8. So that equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 48 is 64 over 8. Square root of 64 is 8. So you've got 4 plus or minus 8 over 8. The numbers that are left, we can divide them all by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, plus or minus 8 divided by 4 is 2, over 8 divided by 4 is 2. I'm sorry, 8 divided by 4 is 2. That's right. So when you split this one up, you do have a fraction. You get 1 plus 2 divided by 2. That equals 3 halves, 3 over 2. That's one answer. And you get 1 minus 2 divided by 2. That equals negative 1 half. That's the other answer. The next one, you got to move the 7 over, so you get 10m squared plus 2m. When you move it over, you change the sign, so that's minus 7. So you have your A, your B, and the C. So x equals the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 2 squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. So that equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 times 2 is 4. Everything after that gets multiplied together. Take care of your signs first. So negative times a negative is a positive. And then 4 times 7 times 10, that is 280, all over 20. So that equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 284 over 20. So you're going to get negative 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 71 over 20. Now once you got that square root simplified, you don't touch it. So we're looking at the negative 2, the 2, and the 20 to see what we can divide by. So we can take half of all of those. So half of negative 2 is negative 1 plus or minus 1 times the square root of 71, but you just write that as the square root of 71 over half of 20 is 10. And because there's a radical left in your answer, you can leave your answer just like it is. You don't have to split it up in this case. Okay, so the next one, I have 5m squared minus 7m. Take the 5 to the other side, it becomes a negative 5. So that's my A, B, and C. X equals the opposite of negative 7 is positive 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2A. So that equals 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. Take everything else and multiply it together. Signs first. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 4 times 5 is 100. And that's going to be over 10. So that gives me 7 plus or minus the square root of 149 all over 10. Square root of 149 doesn't reduce, so you can't do 7 divided by 10. You can't simplify that at all, so you've got your answer here. Okay, the next one. A is 1, B is 4, C is 29. So x equals opposite of b, opposite of positive 4 is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 4 is 16. Everything after that gets multiplied together. Signs first. So a negative, and then 4 times 29 is 116. All over 2. So you get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 100, negative 100 over 2. So you get negative 4 plus or minus. Take the negative out of the radical by calling it I, and the square root of 100 is 10, so that's 10I over 2. We can divide all these by 2, so cut them in half. Half of negative 4 is negative 2, plus or minus half of 10 is 5, 5i, and then over half of 2 is 1, so you don't leave it as a fraction. You don't have a fraction as an answer. So this is the answer to this one. You're done. Number 6, I have 4x squared minus 7x. The negative 8 needs to be moved over, so it's called a positive 8. So you've got your A, B, and C. So x equals the opposite of b. Opposite of negative 7 is positive 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 7 squared, minus 4ac all over 2a. So that gives you 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. Everything after that gets multiplied together. So you just have one negative, so that's going to stay a negative. And then 4 times 4 times 8 is 128. All over 8. So you get 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 79 over 8. So that equals 7 plus or minus. Take the negative out of radical by calling it the letter I. Square root of 79 does not simplify over 8. Now because this has an imaginary component, you do have to split these up. It's going to look like this. 7 over 8 plus or minus the square root, I comes in front of a square root. I times the square root of 79 over 8. Okay, the next one. X times 7x is 7x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x equals 10. Take the 10 over and make it negative. So you get 7x squared minus 2x minus 10, A, B, C. So x equals the opposite of b, so the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 2 squared, minus 4ac all over 2a. So you get 2 plus or minus the square root. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. Everything after that gets multiplied together. You do have a negative times a negative, which is a positive. Oops, let me change colors there. And then 4 times 7 times 10 is 280 over 14. So that equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 284 over 14. So that equals, I think we had 284 earlier. Let me see. Yeah, we did. 284 was the same as 2 times the square root of 71. So we get 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 71 over 14. So you can take half of the numbers of the outside. Half of 2 is 1, plus or minus half of 2 is 1, so you just write the square root of 71 there, over 7, and you have your answer.